political system where
Good
Republicans
evening, ladies and gentlemen.
the governor's office and
My name's Charles Fernandez. I'm an artist and 3D modeler.
Wisconsin, and
I'll be your host tonight as I take
National Democratic Redistricting Committee.
as I offer a follow along on my modeling of a human character in Maya for the
more fair and
Legend of King Arthur
less partisan to one party or another.
3D modeling character design challenge.
Is trying to do is to get more attention on state legislative races.
Where we left off,
during the Obama
I had
era,
just attached
lost nearly
the
1,000
arm
state
that I
legislators.
created
It's
to the body,
remarkable
but
just how much
I'm going
power
to
cratered for Democrats.
delete this.
And they're trying to rebuild this. Democrats did a fairly good job.
I'm going to go back to
they picked up nearly 300.
the arm that I created
were able to elect Democratic
a little bit earlier.
Some places like Wisconsin to break up.
I'm going to spend a little more time
for them to go.
fleshing out the hand, specifically the top of the hand,
20-something
and
running for president on the Democratic side. That state legislative elections are being overlooked.
the thumb here, the
people
thumb
are spending
area.
so much time focusing on the presidential election, they're forgetting that these state legislative elections in 2020 are going to determine
Check to
power
see.
at both the congressional level and the state legislative level for the next decade. And so Holder is frantically trying to catch up.
Is Holder's goal to get Democrats to draw the district maps instead of Republicans, or is his goal to make that process truly nonpartisan?
He says his goal is to try to make
there we
the
go.
process
That was the
more
checkbox that
nonpartisan
screws me
and
up
more
every once in a while.
than it currently
See,
is.
when I
He
was
told me, I don't
selecting,
want to
it was
replace
only
the
selecting what the
Republican
camera
with the
saw.
Democratic gerrymander.
But if I do a
and so
selection
he's
now,
things like
it
independent
will select
redistricting
everything.
commissions. Their main goal has been trying to break up one-party rule in places like Wisconsin so that the map will be a product of compromise. That is really where he's focused the majority of his attention. But there is a tension within the Democratic Party about this, and that tension is only going to be exacerbated by the Supreme Court's
Thumb down
decision.
a little bit.
You're going to have officials in the Democratic Party say, why should I unilaterally disarm? If the Supreme Court gave a green light to partisan gerrymandering, and the Republicans are going to do it everywhere, but in Democratic states, we're just going to pass fairer maps that have more balanced representation, well, that's going to put us at a severe disadvantage.
Let's take a short break here and then we'll talk some more. If you're just joining us, my guest is Ari Berman. He reports on voting rights for Mother Jones magazine, where he's a senior reporter.
So
and
that's
the author
a
of the book,
bit
Give Us the Ballot,
extreme.
The Modern Struggle for Voting Rights in America.
I think
We'll be right back.
that I may
This is Fresh
have.
Air.
Yep, that's what I did.
I'm Jackson Hart. Tonight on All Night Jazz, during the Jazz Trip at 10, we're going to spend some time on a warm summer evening listening
that
to
works
summer
for me.
songs like this one from guitarist Joe Pass. Plus, we're going to be hearing more music from our focus artist of the week, Lee Morgan. The adventure begins tonight at 9 on WUSA
Okay, so now
89.7.
I can go back to the selection tool, turn on camera-based selection.
And from Caring Transitions, a senior move resource to help families ease the stress of life's transitions, offering relocation, home
Also,
cleanouts, and the resale of everyday household
Since I'm
items.
at it,
Locations at
move this
caringtransitions.com.
upward slightly.
And from PBS with Chasing the Moon. American Experience brings the
Blocking
space
off
age to television in
just
a new
the
3-part
top.
series, a story of science, politics, and spectacle. Chasing the Moon continues
go.
tonight at 9, 8 Central on PBS.
This is Fresh Air, and if you're just joining us, my guest is Ari Berman. He's the author of the
I
book, Give Us the
could,
Ballot,
and
The
I
Modern
think
Struggle
perhaps
for
I
Voting Rights
should.
in America, and he reports
I
on
found
voting
this
rights
photo
for Mother Jones magazine.
online,
Last
and
year, 105 states
I kind of
approved
want
ballot
to
initiatives
use it as
to turn
reference.
over redistricting to
It's
independent
got
commissions. How do some of those
a
commissions
decent amount of
as an
detail
alternative to partisan gerrymandering?
on the
It depends
on
on
the
state,
top
and
side.
It depends on the process, but I think generally speaking,
I might be able to
these
use this. So let me
commissions
copy
produce
this,
maps that
or actually
on
save
the
it.
whole are thought to be fair and more representative of the state as a whole. And it works in different ways. In a place like Iowa, for example, they have a nonpartisan demographer who is very well respected, and that person just draws the districts with minimal interference from the legislative process. In other places, like in Michigan in 2021, they're going to have a citizens commission. So they're going to have people with different ideologies, but they're going to be people that are not part of the legislature, are not part of the political process. Now, the thing you always worry about with these commissions is, are the politicians in power going to try to undermine them? Because already we saw in one state, in Missouri, that passed an independent redistricting commission where a nonpartisan group is going to draw the districts there. We already saw legislation proposed in the legislature in the last term to try to weaken that commission. Now, it didn't pass, but it could easily pass again in 2020. So ballot initiatives are not a cure-all, and independent commissions are not a cure-all. And one of the things I think people were disturbed about in John Roberts' decision in the gerrymandering case is he pointed to independent redistricting commissions as one solution to this problem, but Roberts didn't note that in 2015 he voted to gut an independent redistricting commission from the state of Arizona. So I think some cynical people believe the Supreme Court saying, okay, you can use independent redistricting commissions, but then those commissions are going to come before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court's then going to strike those very commissions down. Now, that would be incredibly hypocritical for the court to do that, but nonetheless, 4 justices are already on record as supporting that position. It was only Anthony Kennedy, who's no longer on the court, that saved the viability of independent redistricting commissions in places like Arizona.
There's another big voter issue that you've been following, and this pertains to Florida. Last year, Florida voters approved a ballot initiative overturning the state's law saying that convicted felons could never vote again. And so overturning that would have restored the vote to 1.4 million Floridians. But the Republicans countered that. What did they do?
What Republicans in the Florida legislature did is they passed a law this year, which was just signed by the governor, was to require all of those people with past felony convictions that were set to get their voting rights restored, that they would have to pay all fines, fees, and restitution before becoming eligible to vote. Now, this is such a big deal because so many people with past felony convictions in Florida owe tens of thousands of dollars in fines, fees, or restitutions after their sentence. And I think the voters in Florida, broadly speaking, when they passed this initiative restoring voting rights to ex-felons in 2018, I think they believed that if you had paid your debt to society, you would be able to vote, and that paying your debt meant serving your time. That was, when I reported in Florida, that's how I understood how the public viewed this issue. But it's very, very easy to find people who owe tens of thousands of dollars in fines and fees and restitution. And many of them are poor and they'll never be able to pay this off. And so what the ACLU and other groups who are challenging this new law are saying is that this is a poll tax, that this essentially conditions voting on how much money you have and whether you can pay your fines and fees off. And there was a study that was done about a decade ago that said that up to 40% of those people who are waiting to have their rights restored owed past fines and fees. If you look at the 1.4 million people that were set to have their rights restored, if 40% of them can't pay off their fines, that means over 500,000 people who are set to have their right to vote back might not actually get the right to vote back. That's an enormous number of people who could potentially be disenfranchised by this new law.
And it's also an enormous number of people who could tip the balance for the state in the next
let's do this.
Absolutely. You just look at the 2018 election in Florida. The Senate race in Florida was decided by 10,000 votes. The governor's race in Florida was decided by 30,000 votes. In that same election, 1.7 million people couldn't vote because of a past felony conviction. 1.4 million of those people were set to have their voting rights restored. So that meant there could be over 1 million new voters eligible to cast a ballot in one of the most important swing states of the country. And this disproportionately affects African American voters who make up more than 20% of those people that have lost their voting rights. They also made up a huge chunk of people who registered to vote after the ballot initiative went into effect, before the Florida legislature passed this new law. So I think the feeling is that this is going to shrink the number of voters, and in particular, it's going to hurt black voters and Democratic-leaning voters. Not exclusively. There's going to be a whole lot of white Republican ex-felons who are going to lose their voting rights as well. But because of mass incarceration and because of the way our criminal justice system works, felon disenfranchisement falls more on some people, particularly minority communities, than others. And now you're just putting an entirely new roadblock up for them. And so I think there are going to be some people that won't be able to pay their fines off at all. There are going to be other people that actually probably are eligible to vote, but they're not going to be sure about the process, and they're not going to want to take the risk of possibly voting for fear that they could be prosecuted if they had made some sort of a mistake. And so I think this just sends a real chilling message in Florida to a group that's already pretty vulnerable and marginalized, thought they were in line to get their rights back, and now they might not, or it might be that they have to complete step X, Y, and Z instead.
Ari Berman, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you so much for having me back, Terry.
Ari Berman covers voting rights for Mother Jones magazine and is the author of the book Give Us the Ballot, The Modern Struggle for Voting Rights in America. After we take a short break, Maureen Corrigan will review a new novel partly inspired by the author's family's encounter with violent racial hatred. This is Fresh Air.
This is WUSF 89.7 News, Jazz, NPR. Next time on Q, Perry Farrell. He's the frontman of the band Jane's Addiction, but he's just put on a new solo album called Kind Heaven as a preview for a new interactive experience coming to Las Vegas next year. Perry explains why the new record is like a version of a biblical myth, bigger than just music and adapted for the current political moment. That's coming up on the next edition of Q at 8 o'clock tonight, right here on WUSF.
October
All right,
is a
so
beautiful time to be in Spain and experience the
as
art,
you
the
can
culture,
see,
and the delicious cuisine.
I have
I'm Joanne Yurovsky, and our travelers will be
taken
staying in
photo
full
reference off the
accommodations in
internet,
Madrid and Barcelona, and enjoying
dropped
day
it
trips
into an
to
image
Segovia,
plane
Toledo,
that I
and
will now be
Figueres,
using
the hometown
as
of artist Salvador Dali,
a reference, a
We'll enjoy
backdrop,
exclusive concerts, including one in
so that
Chopin
I
South
can
in Valdemasa. I invite
more
you to
accurately
visit wusf.org/.
recreate a hand.
This is Fresh Air. When novelist Alexei Zentner was 18 years
Let
old,
me
his parents' office
add
was
this.
firebombed by white supremacists. His parents were both clinical social workers and activists against racism and anti-Semitism. That violent confrontation with racial hatred helps inform Zentner's just-published third novel, Copperhead. Our book critic Maureen Corrigan has a review.
Jessup Collins
and
wants out. The main character of Alexei Zentner's tough new novel called Copperhead. Jessup is a 17-year-old high school football star with a decent shot at getting a college scholarship. That scholarship is essential because Jessup, his mom, and his kid sister live paycheck to paycheck in a trailer on the outskirts of an upstate New York town that sounds a lot like Ithaca. Jessup knows that many of his classmates and even some of his teachers regard him as so-called trailer trash. But what's worse, they assume he's a white supremacist, maybe a Nazi. How could he not be? He wears a camo hunting jacket to school. His family attends the Blessed Church of the White America, and his brother and stepfather are serving time in prison for killing 2 African-American college students in a fight. Clearly, Jessup has a lot of family history to outrun. Copperhead is a smart, propulsive story about racism, class, and the limits of individual possibility. It mostly avoids those compromises that socially conscious novels sometimes feel obliged to
X-ray
make,
mode,
namely trading off complexity of character and literary style in favor of message. Instead, Zentner vividly realizes Jessup's daily world here, from the smell of an approaching snowstorm, a wet bruise on the air, to the down and dirty scrimmages of his football games. Though it's not marketed as such, Copperhead has some of the feel of a YA novel. We see things through Jessup's fraught teenage perspective, and the focus of the story is on his clumsy struggle to separate from and yet still love his virulently racist family. I can imagine the novel sparking heated discussions in high school English classes as well as in book groups for the more mature. The present time of the novel opens on the night of the big game, when Jessup's team is playing a rival high school as sleet is falling. We're told that there will be a few kids like Jessup on the other team. Everywhere there are boys like him, but mostly the kids from Kilton Valley live in 4-bedroom homes with gas fireplaces used only for decoration, cedar fences to keep the golden retriever in. There will be boys on the Kilton Valley team who are already looking forward to getting home before the game has even started, thinking about warming up and drying off instead of the ritualized brutality Jessup loves. A college scout from Syracuse is in the stands that night, but that game is especially charged for Jessup because his stepfather, David John, has just gotten out of prison, and he's in the stands too. A plumber by trade, David John was a mostly good influence in Jessup's early life, but there was also always a racist edge to his guidance. Can't be lazy, David John would advise Jessup. The world ain't what it used to be. You need a college degree to get anywhere now, and they've got all kinds of quotas that you don't fit into. So study up, unless you want to be working knee-deep in crap your whole life, like me. David John sports tattoos hidden under his work shirts, the kind of tattoos that proclaim things like pure blood and Rahowa or racial holy war. Those same type of tattoos on Jessup's brother's body ignited the fight that resulted in the deaths of the 2 black college students. Jessup wishes his stepdad would disappear from his life, but before the night is out, he's got more horrific problems to grapple with. Zentner writes in short chapters, many clocking in around 4 pages long, that drive the action. As Jessup, the proverbial innocent, finds himself caught up in another racially motivated violent incident, he resigns himself to the fact that, in the eyes of the world, he'll always be implicated in his family's sins. Copperhead is a pretty unsparing story about how one's fate is determined so much by the random luck of one's family. But it's also merciful enough to leave the exit door of reinvention cracked open.
Maureen Corrigan teaches literature at Georgetown University. She reviewed Copperhead by Alexei Zentner. Tomorrow on Fresh Air, we'll talk about the Yiddish language production of Fiddler on the Roof that's currently playing off-Broadway. My guests will be Stephen Skybell, who stars as Tevye, and Joel Gray, who directed the show. We'll hear songs from the forthcoming Yiddish cast recording. I hope you'll join us. Fresh Air's executive producer is Danny Miller. Our interviews and reviews are produced and edited by Amy Salek, Phyllis Myers, Sam Brigger, Lauren Krenzel, Heidi Simon, Teresa Madden, Mood Zadie, Thea Challoner, and Seth Kelly. I'm Terry Gross.
A fiddler auf dem Dach. Meshuggah, nein. Aber bei uns in einer Tefke ist jeder einer a min Fiddler auf dem Dach. Was will auskratzen, a poscheten, harzigen Niggen und doch nicht sprechendem Kopf. Und es ist nicht so leicht. Wettet ihr, müsst ihr mich fragen, vor was bleiben wir da sitzen, ob die Sakone ist so groß? Wir bleiben, weil an der Tefke ist unser Heim. Und wie also halten wir das Tacke aus? Auf dem hab ich ein Entfer. Gott ist ein Vater und heilig ist sein Teure.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Progressive Insurance, offering a way to buy home insurance with their Home Quote Explorer tool. Custom quotes and rates are available online. Learn more at progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. Now that's Progressive. And from Home Advisor, committed to helping homeowners find the right pro for their home projects. Homeowners can get matched to local pros, read reviews, and check project cost guides at homeadvisor.com.
This is WUSF 89.7 Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota. We are broadcasting from the University of South Florida. I'm Tyler Klein. Stay with us. Q is coming up next. And Q is sponsored in part by the Open Network, a season of community conversations where you can shape content around universal themes such as civility and future city. More at learnopen.org. This is WUSF.
I'm Robin Sussingham, and here's a little taste of what you'll hear on The Zest.
I do know of one person who would not give her recipe out, and it had to do with the meringue.
The Zest is our new podcast all about food.
They can cook 200 steaks at one time.
You'll meet restaurant owners, chefs, cooks, food experts, bakers, brewers, growers, and fishermen.
See, I get emotional when I start talking about it because this is what I fell in love with, and this is my passion. Not just bourbon, but spirits as a whole, but bourbon is amazing.
Maybe you'll hear about a restaurant you want to try or a dish you just have to make.
We bury the cabbage inside the coals, and then we let it cook. It's about an hour and 15 minutes until it's completely charred on the outside. And then inside it's sweet, soft, and succulent, juicy, steaming with little smokiness.
To listen and subscribe, visit thezestpodcast.com.
Hi, I'm Sandra Oh.
Hey, this is Trevor Noah.
Hey, I'm Matthew McConaughey.
And you're listening to Q.
And you're listening to Q.
With Tom Power.
With Tom Power.
Talking to Perry Farrell, the lead singer of Jane's Addiction, is a lot like riding a train by hanging on to the outside of it. You're holding on the best you can, but you still enjoy the ride. Perry has a new album out that's about something bigger than just music. It's about God, about prophets, about our world's future, and surprise, surprise, it's also about Donald Trump. Perry Farrell is here to tell you all about it and reflect on a life in alternative rock. Plus, whether you're a country music fan or not, whether you're headed to the Stampede or you throw darts at a picture of Garth Brooks, Rhiannon Giddens will make you think differently about country music. She'll explain to you her groundbreaking project coming up on Q.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. Joint Chiefs Chairman General Joseph Dunford says the U.S. is working on creating an international maritime security force to counter the threat from Iran. NPR's Tom Bowman reports it comes after Iran shot down an American drone and is suspected of attacking tankers in the Persian Gulf.
General Dunford said the U.S. would provide command and control ships as well as drones and surveillance aircraft. The Allies would in turn provide patrol ships and maybe escort ships for their own tankers flying flags from their own countries. General Dunford said they're still working out the details with allies who he said have the political will to take part in this maritime security force. He said an announcement could be made in the next couple of weeks.
NPR's Tom Bowman. The latest challenge to the Affordable Care Act was heard in a federal appeals court today. What's new in the case is that the penalty for not having health insurance is now $0. As NPR's Selena Simmons-Duffin reports, that's because of the tax overhaul Republicans passed in 2017.
Texas and a group of other Republican states are now arguing a $0 penalty is not a tax, so it's not constitutional, and the whole law must be struck down. The law, also known as Obamacare, is being defended by California and other Democratic-led states. A panel of 3 judges heard arguments from both sides, but a decision in the case isn't expected for months. In the meantime, the law stays as it is. Regardless of what the Fifth Circuit panel decides, this case will likely be another blockbuster healthcare case at the Supreme Court. Selena Simmons-Duffin, NPR News.
A new report by the Secret Service analyzed mass attacks of violence last year. NPR's Brian Naylor reports there were common themes in the 27 incidents outlined in the report.
The attacks included the shootings at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Secret Service Director James Murray says there were some similar characteristics among the attackers.
Half the attackers were motivated by a grievance. 2/3 had a history of mental health challenges.
Nearly all had experienced a significant stressor in their lives. Likewise, nearly all had previously made threatening or alarming communications directed toward or made in the presence of others.
The report says there are warning signs prior to acts of violence, and people should share concerns they have about coworkers, classmates, or family members. Brian Naylor, NPR News, Washington.
Former Vice President Joe Biden and his wife Jill Biden earned more than $15 million in the past 2 years. That's according to the couple's latest tax records. The majority of that income came from speaking engagements in 2 books written by the former VP, who's widely considered to be the top contender for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. You're listening to NPR. The Smithsonian National Museum of American History is looking to expand its collection with drawings made by formerly detained migrant children. NPR's Sasha Ingber reports the museum is still in the early stages of acquiring the objects.
The children's drawings show frowning stick figures in cages. Pediatricians recently released the images to media outlets following reports of squalid conditions at detention facilities, prompting a curator at the Museum of American History to reach out. Director Emeritus Brent Glass says this is about the Smithsonian documenting history as it unfolds.
I think it would be consistent with the museum's mission to document and tell the story of America, and it's a complex and rich story.
A spokesperson for New York's Tenement Museum, which documents immigrant stories, says the drawings are a reminder that current and future generations must reckon with a complicated past. Sasha Ingber, NPR News.
Researchers say they're looking for volunteers willing to undergo brain scans while they are trying to kick opioid addiction. Researchers at the National Institutes of Health aiming to scan the brains of people undergoing a medication-based treatment to find out how the brain works in ways that can persist even after people are off the medications. Researchers say they're hoping to figure out which of 3 drugs works best to help ease cravings associated with opioids. It's estimated only a few of the millions of opioid users who need anti-addiction drugs are currently getting the medicines. On Wall Street, a mixed close. The Dow was down 22 points. The Nasdaq closed up 43 points today. I'm Jack Spear, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Subaru, committed to doing its part to make the world a better place by supporting philanthropic initiatives in local communities. Learn more at Subaru.com/lovepromise. Love, it's what makes a Subaru a Subaru.
I'm Susan Stamberg, a founding mother of National Public Radio. In 40 years, we've become a soundtrack of democracy, keeping citizens posted on the ills and joys of life, with recipes, Dow Jones averages, congressional votes, war coverage, providing an indispensable service that's available nowhere else. This is NPR.
And this is your NPR station, WUSF 89.7. Glad you're with us on this Tuesday. Coming up tonight on All Night Jazz, the other 9 to 5, Jackson Harp shares a warm and pleasant evening of summer songs. That's on the Jazz Strip at 10, with music from guitar great Joe Pass and others, plus more music from our Focus Artist of the Week, trumpeter Lee Morgan. And then later on our Midnight Standard, we'll hear another version of Jerome Kern's All the Things You Are. The adventure begins tonight at 9, right after Q, here on WUSF.
You are listening to Q on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and from Public Radio International, also known as PRI. I'm Tom Howard. It's a bit of a low bar, but those have to be the most famous dog barks in rock music history, right? Right? That's a little bit of Jane's Addiction, the massive hit, Been Caught Stealing. The song sort of kicked off the alternative rock explosion in the early 90s. None of that would have happened without the music of Jane's Addiction. They forged a path for generations of bands to follow. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Rage Against the Machine, and Perry Farrell, the frontman for Jane's Addiction, went a step further. He launched Lollapalooza, the hugely influential outdoor festival that's lasted for decades. Now, nearly 30 years later, Perry Farrell is still making his mark on music. just a little bit of Perry Farrell's new album, Kind Heaven. As you're about to hear, it's a project that reaches into all corners. It's part dance party, part heavy metal protest record, part weekend spiritual retreat. Perry Farrell has spent a lot of time reconnecting with his Jewish roots, and while this all might sound a bit heavy, it's actually pretty fascinating how it all plays into his next chapter.
What I'm working on today is a project. It's an art project. As all of my art projects, they're based in music, but they have a mythology based around it. And in this case, it's we're talking about the story of the second coming of the Messiah, the second Messianic era. And we're crossing let's make believe. It is right around now, and we're crossing the threshold of it. There was a rabbi called the Lubavitcher Rabbi who died in around 1993. And he, the Hasidic community was claiming that he was the Messiah. He never said he was the Messiah, but this has happened throughout history in the Hasidic communities. In the 12th century, there was talk of the Messiah was returning back then. So there's always been talk of it. Isaiah was the prophet who said there will be a Messiah coming. So I started to think, what if the Messiah came now? The Hasidics were saying 1993. It was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. But if it was him, or if it wasn't him, and if the Messiah is going to be here, let's say in 10 years, he's going to deal with the CIA, the FBI, Russia, America, Saudi Arabia, the world today, the internet. So I started to write this story out as if it were happening right now. Who would be the Antichrist? What would Armageddon be? Would Armageddon be a fight between two different countries? Would it be a nuclear holocaust? Would it be a cyber war? Would it be the war between the sexes? Would it be a war that is up in your head? Would it be a war between you and yourself?
So what would it look like? What would it look if these things?
I'm kind of laughing to myself, thinking, right now, if the Messiah were to be alive, he would be spied on because of the surveillance and that is going on around the world. I mean, every time you turn on your computer or your handheld, probably you're being recorded. Yeah. So would the Messiah be a friend of the people, or would he be perceived as to be an enemy of the state? Right. So that's. But at the same time, forget about what's going on with mankind. What about the spiritual realms? What would be going on then? Because what's supposed to happen is heaven is supposed to come down. God is supposed to live with us again, as he did back in the days of Moses, Moses' era, when he was helping the people and doing miracles. We're supposed to see now signs and wonders. And I'm spotting signs and wonders. As an example, this show is a wonder. You and I are speaking, but it's being broadcast out to the entire world and recorded, so we can look at it later if we'd like. This to me is a wonder. The fact that I was able to come from Detroit on this on a steel horse I ride.
Yeah. You can travel great distances.
You can travel great distances.
Yeah, in short amounts of time. That's a wonder. I understand.
And it's getting faster and faster and faster. Yeah. So I'm seeing the wonders. I'm seeing the signs.
Oh wait, hold on.
I'm seeing potentials.
These are
of Messianic era.
These are the knuckles here.
Perry, I mean, everyone has perspective on the President of the United States right now. I'm wondering what perspective you were trying to bring in that song.
Oh, you know what? Let's hold off on that.
As I explained to you, I'm writing a story. It's like a mythology. So I used, like all artists do, I'm using the reflections of the world as I see it today. And I saw somebody who I thought would make a great Antichrist.
The President, Donald Trump.
I didn't say Donald Trump. You did.
Is it?
I'm telling you, I'm making this up.
Okay.
So, I'm using...
That's what I took from it anyway.
Okay. Well, that's okay. That's fair.
Cool.
With a wink. So, I'm making art. And I think that I see somebody that would make a great Antichrist.
Yeah. What's the role in the artist in speaking out about things or trying to change things that you see problems in the world?
Well, we are great messengers. And we have great platforms today to spread the message. We're doing it right now. Radio, got a great bandwidth. But I think there's nothing better. This is why I'm going into these small venues initially, so I can see people eye to eye and soul to soul. You can see me, you know who I am, and you can see exactly what I'm about. There's no photo retouching, and it's like a sporting event. This is life or death right here. And that's the way, if you really want to spread the message, and you've got to do it the oldest way, and that is reach out and touch people and look in their eyes and let them know you.
If you're just tuning in, my name is Tom Power. You're listening to Q. I'm speaking with the one and only Perry Farrell, frontman of Jane's Addiction, the force behind the Lollapalooza Festival, about his latest album, Kind Heaven. Play this for me. What is it?
Psycom. That was my first group.
Ziola, Psycom, yeah.
Yeah, so we just came from Detroit.
Oh. Actually,
Darlene
I
Ziola, she was
forgot
from Detroit. And
some things that I used to do.
Los Angeles, where I met her. It was a really interesting story
modeling the
there.
hand.
So I fell in love with this girl. She's passed. She died maybe 25 years ago, or something like that. When I just started getting going with Jane's Addiction. And she was the first girl I'd gotten high with, and on heroin. And I was the first guy that she got high. Like, she basically asked me if I could get her heroin, and I said, yeah. Mm-hmm. And we did it together. This is really a wild story. So years later, after she passed, I found out from my cousin that she was my cousin.
What?
And yeah.
So you were in a relationship with this person, and you were...
I didn't know that she was my cousin. And so the people... And my cousin's in Detroit.
Awkward.
Where she was from.
How did you feel then?
I mean... How would you feel?
I don't know.
Just how I felt.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, but I guess also a mixture of...
It was a mixture.
Yeah, shame, grief, loss,
I wasn't so ashamed.
Yeah.
Because we had a really great love.
Yeah.
And I didn't know.
But back to that song, or back to that time in your life, like it feels like... I saw a sign at the Women's March that really stuck with me. And it said, I can't believe I still have to protest this. And I felt like it was saying something that we've been talking about this for so long, nothing seems to be getting better. And I think about...
No, it is.
I think about in the 80s, it was the Reagan era, you had the Cold War, the AIDS crisis. I mean, you were responding to that moment then, not dissimilarly to the way you're responding to this moment now. Does it feel different?
Well, as far as pure feeling, it feels more critical. It absolutely feels like this is no time to keep your mouth shut. This is a time when we've got to express ourselves. The artists need to express themselves and not hold back, because we are all, there's this universal hard drive that contains all of our collective emotions and feelings, and we're all and then today we have this beautiful thing, the internet, where we can reach out and quickly say, this is going on and this is how I feel and this is a good thing. So I think that the silence, no. Be silent when you're down by a creek and you have a picnic basket near you so you can hear the crickets. But with all this going on, this insanity where these rich men are trying to just organize and swipe the world away from us, is not the time to be silent.
Do you feel different as an artist now than you did back then? Do you feel like the art you're making is different?
I feel that I'm wiser. So I feel like my focus on what needs to happen is better, and I feel I'm more organized. I've got a better sense on how to actually succeed with, I might have something I need to express and something that needs change, and I feel I'm better equipped to change it now.
How are you with regret? I mean, you were telling me stories about just then about, doing heroin, and this is something you've been really candid about, and your drugs in the past. I know also, we've been talking about this too, that you've made spirituality, I mean, this is a weird way of putting it, but spirituality is sort of a hallmark of your life. Does it make you look back negatively at your past?
No.
Would you change things?
Well, I'd change probably over 1 million things.
Yeah.
I would change yesterday a little bit. Day before, it doesn't go perfect, but this is the lesson. And this I learned from a really, really wise man. Nobody's perfect.
I thought that was going to be longer than it was, Perry.
No. It's really, but let that sink in. You do that every day. Just when, like, oh my God, just say to yourself, nobody's perfect. It's not a perfect world. It's imperfect. And it's imperfect, but that gives us a chance to roll up our sleeves and refine it. Mm. And that's the balance of the universe. It's a good thing. It's nice.
Generations of rock musicians, I mean, you just turned 60, right? Recently?
Yes.
There's generations of rock musicians that are getting older, and I think about, what it meant for a certain generation to see Bob Dylan and Paul McCartney, get a little bit older, what it might mean for a certain generation to see you get older. How are you navigating your role as an artist as you go into the next phase of your life?
Well, like I say, I'm gargling now, and I take vitamins, and I really enjoy life. Anytime I think to complain, like, oh man, my toe is so sore, like I might have turf toe from dancing. I'm thinking to myself, I just tell myself, that one side of myself, shut the up. Mm-hmm. Is that, honest truth is, look, you're in Toronto today, and Toronto is such a killer place. You're living it up, man. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. I think I understand what you mean. There's a practicality to it.
Yeah, and I'm happy. Like I say, I think these days, if I were to make believe that we all reincarnate, and then we all, everybody that's listening, we reincarnated right around 2020 to be around for 2020. Mm-hmm. I think it's a fine time to be alive.
You think good things are going to happen?
I think it's going to be exciting as can be. Yeah. And I like to use sports analogies a lot for some reason. I guess because sports and entertainment are so intertwined, there's so many, there's so many comparisons you can make. And like a good sporting event, you want it to be thrilling, and you don't want one side to blow the other out. That would be like if the bad guys won real big time, that would really suck. But it would kind of suck to witness something where the good guys were just blowing out the bad guys.
You want it to be a little bit tight.
You want it to be tight.
You know what? I end a lot of interviews with artists asking, like, hey, why don't you lie on the beach? And you've done some really great work. Why don't you take it easy? I feel no impulse to ask you that question because I just see I see art coming out of you whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I love the beach though.
Do you know what I mean? I see art coming out of you whether you're sleeping or not.
Yeah, it's fun for me. It's as fun as going to the beach. But I love nature. I love going surfing. I love going snowboarding. I love going hiking. I like bike riding. I like, I love vacation, all that. So what I try to do is I try to do this admixture where I have Lollapaloozas around the world, and then right after that, I'll go on a boat and I'll go to the Galapagos Islands.
Yeah, I heard that.
That's how I do it.
You took your kid to the Galapagos Islands, right?
I took my family and my friends.
I should go. I've never been.
Well, let's become better friends.
Maybe I can make it out.
Yeah, maybe you can tell me about some place like you think, hey, we should go here, man, and we plan it.
Yeah.
It might take 3 years or 5 years, and that's how I do it. We plan it. Let's work on it. Let's find the best places to stay.
Yeah.
What she would wear.
Yeah.
I
got one more question for you before, and you've been really great. You've been here for a long time, and I appreciate it. But I was just thinking about this, that a lot of people came in today because they were such big fans of Jane's, right? Out into the studio, they came in, they were excited that you were here because they were big fans of the Jane's Addiction records, big fans of Porno for Pyros, big fans of you. How comfortable are you with that? With people really, loving that era of your life, which to some people is such a generation-defining time, but for you was a few years.
Yeah. Well, it would be like someone saying, I love you. You can't get enough of that. That's how it is.
Yeah.
Just simply like that.
You just feel that love coming in.
When someone says, I love you, they really mean it, you can't get enough of that.
Perry Farrell, his new album, Kind Heaven, is out now. I found myself in a really interesting situation afterwards because we got up, we did the thing we had to do. We took our pictures and put our coats on. Hey, thanks for coming in. Oh, thanks, Tom, all that nice stuff. I sat back down in my chair, got ready to say goodbye. And he said, hey, man, are you going to sing one of those old folk songs for me you were talking about? Because he was asking about me as a musician. And I say I play in a band that plays traditional Newfoundland music, including some old sea shanties. And he said, come on, man, you got to do it for me. So I found myself in this incredibly bizarre situation where I had to sing a sea shanty on guitar for Perry Farrell from Jane's Addiction. And if you know anything about sea shanties, which is a sentence you'll only hear on CBC Radio, you know that they have big choruses. You're supposed to sing along with the choruses, right? And there was Perry Farrell singing Lever, Johnny Lever, top of his lungs, rocking back and forth. Yeah, stick around. More Q after this.
Sweet.
And good evening, I'm Tyler Klein. This is WUSF 89.7, your NPR station. Well, the space that your old or unwanted car, truck, or boat is taking up, well, it can be used for better things. We are accepting vehicle and boat donations that will help fund your favorite programming. We'll tow it away for free and handle everything from start to finish. Just give us a call at 866-WUSF-CAR, and thank you so much for your support.
The National African American Gun Association is a black alternative to the NRA.
Black folks in guns usually get a negative stereotype reaction like, what is that guy doing with a gun?
Now members are debating whether the group should get more political.
When others see that we're for protection, I think maybe it would more than likely increase our numbers.
That story and Noel King at the border on the next Morning Edition from NPR News.
You can join us for Morning Edition tomorrow morning from 5 to 9 right here on WUSF. Julie Marquez of Spectrum Bay News 9 says mostly cloudy overnight tonight with scattered showers and storms. Lows will be in the mid to upper 70s. Rain chances continue to stay around 70% tomorrow and into Thursday. Highs will be in the upper 80s. It'll be a little bit breezy. And all this weather, it's related to a tropical disturbance in the Gulf, and it's too early to know the intensity or path of any potential development. But you can stay up to date on the latest information online at WUSFnews.org.
You are listening to Q on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and from PRI, or Public Radio International. My name is Tom Power. If you came of age between the mid-70s on through the early 90s, photographer Glenn E. Friedman probably changed the way you look at the world. If you had your mind blown by an action shot in Skateboarder magazine of kids defying gravity in an empty pool somewhere in Southern California, chances are good that Glenn E. Friedman took that picture. If you saw a photo of Black Flag or the Bad Brains and glimpsed some kind of freedom you didn't know existed before, well, it might have been a Glenn E. Friedman photograph that opened your eyes. If you bought albums by Public Enemy or Run DMC or the Beastie Boys in the 80s, you were definitely taking home some Glenn E. Friedman photos on those album covers. He documented 3 distinct youth culture movements as a photographer at a time when kids were taking their culture into their own hands, building new movements outside of the mainstream. And Glenn E. Friedman was not an outside observer looking in. He was a kid with a camera, capturing the new world he and his friends were creating as it happened. This summer, Glenn E. Friedman has released 2 newly expanded books of his work, Dogtown, The Legend of the Z-Boys, and Keep Your Eyes Open, the collection of his photographs of the hugely influential Washington, D.C. band Fugazi. Coming this fall is a 3rd collection, Together Forever, which focuses on his photos of Run DMC and the Beastie Boys. But before that, I'm so happy to say that Glenn E. Friedman joins us now. Hi, Glenn. How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. That guy that you were just talking about, wow.
Yeah, he's done pretty good, hey?
I don't know. You gave him quite an introduction, though.
Well, it's true, man. I mean, there are photos in this, especially in Dogtown, The Legend of Z-Boys. You took these photos when you were in middle school, and like some of the photos in this new edition have never been collected before. So, like when you go back through your archives to put this together, what jumped out at you about that time in your life?
What jumped out to me is that, in the time when everything was happening, we really didn't know that, it was going to go past that time. I was trying to inspire people in the moment. I didn't know that 10, 20, 30, 40 years later that people would still be inspired by these photographs.
Was there a moment when you were looking at these photos, though, that you thought like, oh, I remember that? Like, it took you back to a specific moment?
Most of them do, yeah. I mean, I was pretty lucid. I knew what the hell was going on, and I really loved what I was doing. And I could remember. I can't remember every time we brought out the camera, but usually I was very inspired to do so. I didn't just bring my camera with me everywhere I went. You know, in the early days, I would skate more than I would take pictures. And punk rock shows, I would go to 90% of shows without my camera. But when I thought something needed to be shared, by what was going on stage or in front of me at a backyard pool, I felt like, okay, or I knew something like that was going to happen. I'm like, okay, I need to bring my camera today and I need to, compose this and make some photographs to share with other people to show them what in the world is going on that I'm so privy to see that I really want to share and inspire other people.
Tell me a story about like something you had to do kind of crazy in order to get a shot back then.
Well, skateboarding photos, I mean, back then, first of all, a lot of the time we're trespassing on people's property to go into a backyard pool. So I have stories for days that I could tell about, getting chased out by people with baseball bats, chainsaws, shotguns, people screaming and yelling, usually just threatening you. We're just kids, but pretty scary moments, and going into schoolyards and, public drainage ditches, where police would chase you out and you had to run into the mountains and hide in bushes and stuff like that. When I think of what we were doing, we were absolutely insane. And if my soon-to-be 12-year-old was doing anything like that, I'd be scared to death. And I mean, but you also think about the punk rock shows, being threatened by, police pre-Olympics, in Los Angeles. I mean, literally having a police officer who you respected when you were a little kid in grade school, and then, you're 17 years old, and they tell you if you take one step beyond that line, they're going to smash your head into the ground for no good reason. and you all of a sudden learn that the world isn't the place you thought it was. And it turns you into more of a rebel when you see that how evil these people could be when they get their power, and it makes you more of a punk rocker and more radical than ever. And having those experiences, at a young age, it's like, you don't want your own kid to be scared and threatened and have his life on the line, like we did. I mean, we literally did. I survived some pretty intense moments over the years, and not by putting myself in harm's way necessarily on purpose to that degree, but it certainly happened over the years, and definitely added the excitement. I mean, that's what growing up is all about, right?
Yeah. I want to talk about Fugazi for a second. If you're just tuning in, my guest is photographer Glenn E. Friedman. New editions of his books, Dogtown, The Legend of the Z-Boys, and Keep Your Eyes Open, a collection of your photos of Fugazi are out. And so you mentioned Ian MacKaye there a little bit earlier, and Ian MacKaye's, with the band he was part of, Fugazi, they've had a profound effect on a lot of people. This was a band that stuck to their principles. Their shows were almost always all ages. They kept their ticket prices low, among many other things. But I'm thinking there's people out there who still don't know about the band. I mean, for people who know absolutely nothing about Fugazi, what do you think they should know? Why do Fugazi matter?
Well, first of all, their music was incredible and inspiring and brilliant and smart and unique, But besides that, they were a band that was, people use this term DIY, which means do it yourself, right? Now, to be honest, back then when you were involved in punk rock or skateboarding or even hip hop in the early days, there was no other choice. You had to do it yourself. No one was interested in what we were doing, quite honestly. I mean, in skateboarding there were magazines, but and there was an industry, but everything, to find the locations, to build the ramps, for skating, and to put on punk rock shows, and to put out the records. No major corporations were interested in any of this. You didn't have, Nike giving out shoes to skaters. You didn't have Columbia Records or Sony coming and wanting to sign punk rock acts, or hip hop acts in the early days, for that matter. You could only do it yourself. But the interesting thing about Fugazi is and Discord Records in general, that's all they wanted to do. They didn't want to be a part of anyone else's system, right? And not only were they incredibly creative with their music, they had a set of principles in the way they did business and the way they conducted themselves while they were playing their music. They were respectful to the people that enjoyed what they did. They didn't want to gouge them. They didn't want to sell them merchandise. They wanted to play music and inspire them with their music and give them a release through that. They didn't need to make a huge profit. They just wanted it to be accessible to everybody. And therefore they did it themselves, and they controlled everything themselves. And even when they were offered millions of dollars, when they started selling a lot of records and having a huge fan base all over the world, they were perfectly content doing it their way. I was witness to some of these episodes where people would walk into the room after stage, some, epically famous, record executive and say, hey, we'll give you anything. Could you please, we could sell you millions of records. You could reach more people. And the band would be like, well, that's very nice of you. Thank you. But we're fine doing it on our own. We like doing it and controlling our own music and not being part of a major corporation. And they really, were inspiring to me in many ways. Again, and don't forget, the music is the main thing, right? Because if the music wasn't good, no one would care.
There's a quote from Ian MacKaye here from Fugazi, and he said this about you. He said, while most photographers were taking photos of Fugazi, Glenn was making photos with us. So when it comes to that scene, like when it comes to, you're obviously a deep love and admiration for this band. Did you see your role as documenting that time for them, or documenting that time, or was it more collaborating with them?
When I would see them play, they were just totally inspiring to me. And I never saw myself as a documentarian ever. I've happened to have documented some incredible scenes, but without sounding, pretentious. I saw myself as more of an artist, and I was, composing images and making photographs, not just taking them. Much as like, a shaman or someone doesn't want their photograph taken because it takes a part of their soul away or something like that, I was making photographs. I was seeing things that I wanted other people to see. It was inspiring to do all those things, and I just wanted to share that inspiration with other people. I wanted them to see what I was seeing, and in the way, even sometimes in the hip-hop stuff, I had a feeling, and I knew what people were trying to say, even if they didn't look like that, and I would make the painting, which is the photograph, to show it to people, to expose people to this culture so they can get out of it what I'm getting out of it, the excitement, the level of integrity, the culture, and inspiration, right?
And those are incredible. Like, I mean, you have this book coming out called Together Forever, right? Which is, a lot of your photos of Run DMC and the Beastie Boys, but you took photos of like Public Enemy and Slick Rick and LL Cool J and Ice-T, people from what's now called the golden age of hip hop. And who were some of your favorite rappers to photograph back then?
Well, most people I photographed became friends of mine. Some of them were friends of mine before I photographed them. I was friends with the Beastie Boys before I actually took their picture. In fact, when I first met them, I didn't like their music. I didn't think they were very good as a punk rock band. I just thought they were, they were pranksters. But, in Public Enemy, I met those guys at a show, and I heard Chuck's demos, and I liked him. But, Chuck and Hank Shockley were familiar with the My Rules photozine of punk rock photos I had self-published in 1982, so we were all like comrades in a way, so making photos with these people that were making incredible music and being incredibly creative in their moments.
Did you see a thread between them? Like, did you see a thread between skateboarding, punk rock, and hip-hop?
Well, absolutely. They were all about attitude. And it was about rebelliousness, and it was about people standing up for themselves and doing what they wanted to do, and youth doing something on their own that wasn't controlled by adults. So all three had those things in common. Years later, it's obvious to everybody, or not to everybody, but younger people and people involved in the cultures, or even people our age, in the 50s or whatever. Now everyone gets it now, and if you were part of the cultures, you got it then. But back then, people didn't understand it. They just couldn't put it all together. But it's obvious now, and it was to me then, that it's all about attitude.
Skate, punk, hip-hop, huge parts of the DNA of our pop culture right now. And you were an early champion of all of them. You made people stop and look at all of these things and all these people in a different way. Looking back at it now, do you feel like you had a hand in changing our pop culture?
Other people could say that, and that's very nice if people say, I don't know if I would go that far. I couldn't say that myself, and I've been, I know I might sound a little egomaniacal, just the fact that I'm sitting here in front of a microphone says something, but I think that I wouldn't say that I changed pop culture, but I think that certainly there's been an effect. There's something that's going on, and I'm happy that I feel like it's cool. I feel very honored to be the person that was one of the early people to connect all three of those cultures and to really solidify and not be bashful about it. Like, skateboarders are punk rockers, and a lot of people knew that already, but to connect the attitude and to bring hip-hop into it too. And then in 94, when I put out the book, to bring back the 70s culture of skateboarding that a lot of people had forgotten about and show people how these things were already tied in. I'm really happy that I was able to do that.
Glenn, thanks for your time, and I really loved getting a chance to see these books. Thank you for your time.
It's all good, man. It was great talking to you. I appreciate it when I get to speak to someone who actually has a personal interest or, in what's going on and is not just trying to get content.
Glenn, thanks so much for your time. Take care, man.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Glenn E. Friedman is the acclaimed photographer behind the books Dogtown, The Legend of the Z-Boys, and Keep Your Eyes Open. The newly updated and expanded versions of both those books are out now. His next book, featuring Beastie Boys and Run DMC photos, is called Together Forever. You'll be able to find that on bookshelves this September. Rhiannon Giddens is going to blow your mind about country and folk music. Coming up after this on Q.
So, new USF President Stephen Carell, do you have any major changes in the works?
I don't feel the need to make some kind of early statement. My job is to help the USF community make the right decisions for the university in the long run.
I'm Mark Schreiner. Hear part 2 of my interview with the new top bull on the next University Beat. Wednesday at 7:45 a.m. and again at 5:44 p.m.
Jackson Harp. Tonight on All Night Jazz, during the Jazz Trip at 10, we're going to spend some time on a warm summer evening listening to summer songs like this one from guitarist Joe Pass. Plus, we're going to be hearing more music from our Focus Artist of the Week, Lee Morgan. The adventure begins tonight at 9 on WUSF 89.7.
So I like this a lot better. As you can see, it is a far cry improved detail-wise, and I haven't added anything to the rest of the arm. It's all just been a matter of, taking the vertices that are already there,
and from PRI, Public Radio International,
swapping them around, arranging them in a way that makes sense, and also doing some extrusions for the fingernails and adding some some extra edge loops around the knuckles.
Recording music for a project called Songs of Our Native Daughters.
So
she's picked up a
here we are. I may want to adjust that thumb later on, but that doesn't have to happen now. I can go ahead and see the difference.
This kind of music, whose stories get told. She
difference
tells the
there,
as a biracial woman,
and that's even
I've spent
that
most
seems
of my life reading and
still
researching
fairly
folk
simple,
and roots music, particularly
but
American folk and roots music. Did like my degree in it.
The side by side here,
and she laid out this idea. This fact, really,
much better
about how corporations and capitalism have a greater role in segregating country and R&B music than anything else, in a way that completely blew my mind. Before we got into any of that, Rhiannon laid out some of the motivation behind the latest project of hers, Songs of Our Native Daughters.
Alright, well, I'm going to go ahead and add this.
19th century poem, spotted in a museum, and a film that stuck with her.
Yeah, it was, I was in the Smithsonian, the new Museum for African American Culture and History, and I was walking around and I came across this poem by William Cowper, and, it was basically like, oh, those poor African devils, like, but what can we do? We need who can do without sugar and rum, and I found out later it was satire. He was an abolitionist, but it really stuck with me because of the truth of it, even for today, when you think about the little children going down in these mines and, all the folks working in these factories for our cheap clothes. And you kind of go, we always say, oh, yeah, slavery's bad. It's wrong. It's terrible. But like we turn a blind eye to what's going on right now because we cherish our comforts. That was a thought, basically connecting then and now. And there's also this thought of, Black women's pain being used as a spur for action by other people, right? So in this movie about it was during slavery times, and it has its own story, what happened to that movie in the maker. But, the scene was a Black woman who has been given to the white owner's friend for the night, and she's married, of course, and, when she comes from that horrible experience, the camera doesn't focus on her, it focuses on her husband. And it's the impetus for him to join this revolution, And I was just like, I've seen it over and over again, that narrative, and I'm just like, well, what about her? And that's been a lot of my life as an artist is what about her? What is she thinking? What is she feeling? What does this mean for her? And this is kind of where this record came from.
So that led you to pick up the phone and call 3 other women of color who played this kind of music and get together and try to make some songs.
Yeah, I mean, it was a process of, it started off kind of with this idea and then turned into this, and then sort of as happens in my world, and I think in everybody's world, if you're open to it, the things align in the way that they should be. And it turned out to be, I was like, oh, actually, this is a really strong idea to have all Black women who actually play the banjo, because I'd always wanted to tell the stories through the banjo because it is the, quintessential American instrument. It's Black and it's white, and it's, it holds a lot of our cultural history within it. And it's a very powerful thing. And the fact that all three of these women played the banjo as well, and all different banjos, you know. And I was like, oh, this is cool.
So let's take a listen to a little bit of the record. So this is you with Alison Russell, Amethyst Kia, Layla McCalla on this record. This is from, I think, your first day of recording on the project. This is called Moon Meets the Sun.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have gotten a lot done in a tonight with the polishing of the hand and
Songs of Our Native Daughters, a collaborative project
reattaching it to the body.
Moon Meets the Sun. Rhiannon, tell us a little bit about that song.
Yeah, it was the first day that, you know, and Layla wasn't there
Reassign.
yet. It was me and Amethyst and Allison, and we were just sitting around. And it was just really this truly collaborative, you know, each of us contributed pieces of the song and that sort of melded into this, you know, what became the track. And it was just, you know, our first kind of, hey, we're gonna say some stuff. You know, we're gonna. It kind of
that kind of bugs me. Really, so I'm gonna fix that before I do anything else.
The language is pretty strong, you know, but it's also the other part of it is the resilience. You know, it's all of these things happen, yet we dance, yet we continue on, and yet we, you know, maintain this aspect of ourselves that you can't take. You know. And I think it was a really great way to start, you know, because it really did just feel like, okay, there's this incredible collaboration that's going on, and this is kind of the direction, and that, you know, because I had no idea what was going to happen when everybody got together, you know. I had notions and I had a few things to bring, but, you know, it just, as every great project does, it has its own animus, it has its own spirit that sort of takes hold as soon as it starts, and that's kind of where I felt it started with this song, you know. Where things started to go where they were going to end up.
Rhiannon, I want to go back to something you talked about a little bit earlier when you were talking about the banjo being kind of the quintessential American instrument, and you said that in that it's white and it's black. And I guess as a banjo player myself, I'm just so interested with your relationship with the instrument. You know, what spoke to you and said, this is my instrument, and also the reconciling that people need to do when they play that instrument.
Well, yeah, there's a lot to it. You know, there's a lot more than I can get into here. But like, what I just, you know, the thing that drew me to the banjo was the claw hammer. You know, that kind of plunkety plunk thing. You know, that dun ticka dun ticka dun. And I fell in love with that before I knew anything about the history of the banjo. You know, and then I found out, oh, wait a minute. You know, and that was a really amazing, liberating thing, because I had felt like me as a half white person, like, even, you know, felt like I was an interloper in the music. You know, I mean, I've got bluegrass musicians in my family. I've got, you know, I if you're talking about having a right to do something, which I don't think, you know, anybody has a right over other people to play any kind of music, but you know what I mean? Like, I just didn't feel, and that tells you a lot about how it's told, how the story is told. Like, I mean, I even didn't feel like I had an entree to the banjo. And so learning that it's an African, you know, comes from African forebears, it becomes the instrument we know of, you know it as in the Caribbean, comes up to the southern United States, and then the first time white people pick it up is with the minstrel banjo, and then therein lies our problem, you know, is that, you know, it's this folk instrument, a black folk instrument for many, many years, known as a black instrument, and then is turned into a commercial instrument for blackface. And then kind of, you know, it becomes a folk instrument in white communities as well, and there's this continual back and forth cultural interface between blacks and whites as that's happening, and also in the commercial world. But it's not until the 20s that there becomes this concerted effort to change the idea of what that music is and who it belongs to. It's the creation of a false white nationalistic idea, you know, of a white culture, of bluegrass, you know, of square dances and old-timey barn dances and stuff, you know, which back in the day would have been played by black bands, by the way, you know, who also invented square dance calling. And, you know what I mean? There's this huge, like, you know, underbelly of this music that is, you know, that belongs to black string bands and belongs to these, you know, working class black and whites sort of working together, you know, mixing music together, not always working together, but you know what I mean? Music kind of crosses these boundaries. And, these racists basically changed that. And then also the capitalists, like, when the record industry came in and said, this is race music and this is hillbilly music, there's a lot of stuff to back that up. There's a lot of evidence that's basically, it was done to our music. So you go from it being known as a black instrument 100 years later, it's known that it's a white instrument and black people never played it. Everybody knows this, with quotes around the nose. So it's, I always like to look at these things because they're always done for reasons of, power, racism, whatever, like, and that should liberate everyone who plays this music. It's like, look, yeah, it's some racist stuff in this. You get the blackface, it's pretty rough, but it's also some of our earliest, record of black and white cultural exchange. And therefore it's very important not to lose that. And then if you look at the history and that people actually, for their own designs, changed the narrative of American music. They falsified the narrative, basically, is what happened. I mean, it's just clear as day what happened, when you look at the research. Then you kind of go, oh, as a player, hey, this is our music that they tried to take away from this idea of what it actually was, which is, I think, a beautiful thing. Like, the music survives, the music thrives, the music, does this in spite of, the terrible things that were going on at the time historically, the degradations, and then, you talk about appropriation, you talk about who was profiting off of this. I mean, those are other conversations, but I feel like the music itself comes from what is the best of humanity. And we can't really let that get lost in people who try to, the whole notion of what is white and what is black. I mean, that was all false. It was all made up stuff that was put on our music. So for me, I think that should be a liberating thing. I think that then you can go, hey, this is why I've drawn to this music, and let me help spread the word about where it actually comes from, because then the chance that somebody else who's feeling that same alienation, like, I love this, but I have to come to terms with it. But that's part of coming to terms with it too, is the good stuff and the bad stuff, is all of it together.
Mama's crying long, and she can't get up. Mama's crying long, and she can't get up. Mama's hands are shaking, and she can't get up. Mama's hands are shaking, and she can't get up. Mama's running hard from the boss's man. Mama's running hard from the boss's man. Called her anyway, the boss's man. Called her anyway, the boss's man. They lie on the ground again and again. They lie on the ground again and again. I can hear her screaming again and again. I can hear her screaming again and again.
That is Mama's Crying Long from the album Songs of Our Native Daughters. It's an album that features my guest, Rhiannon Giddens. Rhiannon, tell me a little bit about
Alright,
this song.
so looks like there's some...
That was a tough one. I had written it some years ago from a slave narratives book that I was reading. And is, about a woman who had been, repeatedly raped by an overseer or somebody in position of power, the master, I can't quite remember who, doesn't really matter. And she finally has had enough, and she kills him with a knife and hides the knife, and nobody knows quite who's done it. And then her son sees that there's blood on her petticoat, makes up a little song about it, and then they know that it's her, and then they lynch her, they hang her. And this just really struck me, and I thought about that so much, and then it came out as a child's song from his point of view. Again, it's like these things happen, and they're more than just two sentences in a book. It's like, but what about her? But in this instance, what about him? What about the child? What about, in his complete innocence, doesn't know that he's doomed his mother, And singing it was really intense, and I've been keeping it for a while. Tried it in different places, and I was like, that's not right. I took it back, and then I was surrounded by my sisters, and I said, this is the moment this song wanted to be heard, and it was a very tough recording, but I think really it was important for me.
Rhiannon, I could talk to you about this stuff for the next 8 hours, but I want to close this way. Is that I've read that Amethyst Ikea, one of your collaborators on the record, said that this record is asking who we are, where are we going, and where we come from. For you, what do you think this record, Songs of Our Native Daughters, is asking?
I mean, I think it's just asking people to think twice, about what their assumptions about what is American history and who gets to say it. There's so many really. I mean, truth is much more interesting than the fiction you see on movie screens. To be honest with you, when you start reading and you start realizing what people had to live through, what people had to survive, what people had to, deal with on a day-to-day basis, you just kind of go, you know what, God smite me if I ever complain about my iPhone again. And it's when you dig into that, you kind of realize, wow, there's also so much to celebrate here. There's a lot of tough stuff, but it's like, that's kind of my overarching thing these days. It's like when you dig in and you find the hard stuff, you also find the beauty, and I think a lot of that shines through on the record. There's all the hard stuff, but then I think what you walk away with is, man, think about what we could do if we didn't have to deal with all this crap.
Just powerful stuff. Rhiannon Giddens' latest project is a record called Songs of Our Native Daughters, a celebration of folk artists of color. That record is out now. If you find yourself in Guelph, Ontario later this week, you can catch Rhiannon Giddens performing as part of the Hillside Festival this Friday, July 12th. All right, tomorrow on the show, this is exciting, Kevin Bacon. So I guess I'm 1 degree removed now? Kevin Bacon philosophizes on the show tomorrow. See you then. Later on.
PRI, Public Radio International.
Imagine yourself in Paris, in a lonely French cafe. Or perhaps tilting at windmills on the Spanish plain. Or shopping in an exotic Moroccan marketplace. Go there on our jazz trip at 10, part of All Night Jazz. The adventure begins nightly at 9 on WUSF 89.7.
The adventure begins here in just a few minutes on WUSF, bringing you the best of Tampa's jazz on the radio every night of the week from 9 p.m. until 5 o'clock when we hit Morning Edition. For more information about jazz, local news, weather, and traffic, be sure and visit us at WUSF.org. And you can also follow All Night Jazz on Facebook. This is WUSF 89.7 Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota, broadcasting from the University of South Florida. Here's NPR News.
All right. I'm happy with that.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear.
All right.
The Homeland Security Department reports
saving this out again.
Populations of immigrants crossing the southern border dropped 28% from May to June, suggesting the Trump administration's aggressive tactics are having an impact. As NPR's John Burnett explains, the government says the border crisis has not abated.
Federal agents took into custody just over 104,000 immigrants in June. That's about 40,000 fewer than the previous month. The agency has been beleaguered by a historic surge of families and children and harshly criticized for how it treats those vulnerable migrants. Homeland Security says under an agreement with Washington, Mexico is interdicting substantially more migrants on its southern border with Guatemala. The summer heat, which spikes to over 100 on the Southwest Divide every day, is also a seasonal factor in discouraging the trek. But the agency is far from celebrating. A statement released late Wednesday warned, "We're past the breaking point and in a full-blown emergency. This situation should not be acceptable to any of us." John Burnett, NPR News.
The fate of President Barack Obama's signature health care law is again up for grabs, with what's known as Obamacare
so we scaled it up
argued before
significantly.
Federal court again. A three-judge panel of the Fifth U.S. Circuit
We're
Court of
gonna
Appeals
mirror
in
it.
New Orleans is looking at a federal judge's December ruling. That judge declared the Affordable Care
Scale it
Act,
back
which
down.
provides coverage and health insurance for millions of Americans, was made unconstitutional by Congress in 2017 when it zeroed out a tax that was levied on people who lack health insurance. The judge argued that without the so-called individual mandate, the entire law fails. That case is likely to go to the Supreme Court. Top congressional Democrats are calling for U.S. Labor Secretary Alex Acosta to step down. NPR's Windsor Johnston reports calls for Acosta's resignation following yesterday's indictment of financier Jeffrey Epstein, who's facing sex trafficking charges involving underage girls.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi calls Acosta's role in a decade-old plea deal that spared Epstein from a possible life sentence for molesting teenage girls unconscionable. Acosta was a federal prosecutor in South Florida at the time. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is also demanding his resignation.
It is now impossible
for anyone to have confidence in Secretary Acosta's ability to lead the Department of Labor.
Congressional Republicans have so far stopped short of calling for Acosta to resign. Separately, prosecutors in New York have unsealed new sex trafficking charges against Epstein, alleging the abuse of dozens of female minors. Windsor Johnston, NPR News, Washington.
U.S. employers are putting up fewer help wanted signs in May. The government reports job openings posted by U.S. employers slipped 0.7%. On Wall Street, the Dow was down 22 points. The NASDAQ closed up 43 points. You're listening to NPR. Federal regulators have adopted a rule that will allow community banks to engage in certain kinds of speculative trading. NPR's Jim Zarroli reports the move exempts small banks from the so-called Volcker Rule.
Under the Volcker Rule, banks are barred from using federally insured deposits for speculative trading or buying into potentially risky investment funds. The rule was meant to prevent the kinds of activities that got banks in trouble after the financial crisis. Now, regulators have approved an exemption for banks with less than $10 billion in assets. Community banks had argued that the regulations were onerous, especially because most of them didn't do much risky trading anyway, but critics say the exemption gives community banks a loophole to engage in hedge fund-style activities. Jim Zarroli, NPR News, New York.
So, there is one final thing that I need to do in order to make this model ready for UV mapping. I need to give this model some ears. It's one of those things where I actually completely forgot that I needed to add them until I was thinking about it just now. I was like, I'm about ready to UV map this thing. I'm like, nope. No, I am not. He has no ears. What kind of wizard would he be if he couldn't listen to people?
$7.83 a barrel in New York. I'm Jack Spear, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Zimmel Family Foundation, supporting the National Center for Learning Disabilities, which works to improve the lives of the 1 in 5 individuals with learning and attention issues. Learn more at ncld.org.
It's All Night Jazz here on WUSF 89.7 News, Jazz, NPR, your NPR station. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jackson Harp. I'm going to be hanging out with you until 1 o'clock today. Then I'll hand you over to Steve Splain. He'll take care of you until Morning Edition at 5. Starting off the night, we're going to be hearing a recording from the Detroit Tenors and their brand new self-titled album released just earlier this month. We'll be hearing a track written by Gene Ammons called The One Before This. Following that, we'll hear from vocalist Tierney Sutton with The Windmills of Your Mind. That's from her March release album Screenplay, with Christian Jacob joining on the piano, Kevin Axt on the bass, and Ray Brinker on drums. And the Gary Burton New Quartet is going to close out this opening set with Etude from the album Common Ground. All of this and more coming up on All Night Jazz, including more music from our Focus Artist of the Week, Lee Morgan. This is the Detroit Tenors, The One Before This.
I'm happy with that. I'm digging that. I'll be saving this out, uploading it to Artstation as an update. As soon as I'm done with those ears, part of me is tempted just to model the toes and go ahead and, like, at least as a rough, to get those out of the way and done with. Because I do want to use this model for other things eventually. So that's a tough call. It's a tough call. I might as well go ahead and do it, I think. Model the ears, model the toes, then UV map the thing, then bring it into a sculpture program. and start going to town on it. Alright, so it is now 9 o'clock. I will go ahead and call it for the evening. Thank you very much for watching. By way of shouting out my audio source, I'm listening to NPR, National Public Radio, WUSF in Tampa. So that is my call out for my audio source. Thank you very much for watching, and may the force be with you.